The expensive wine in Michael's glass slashed dangerously as he gestured dramatically, recounting his latest triumph to our captivated family. The investors couldn't write the check fast enough. He boasted, his designer watch catching the light. $50 million, just like that. I took a small sip of my own wine, watching my mother beam at her stepson with undisguised pride. Dad was nodding along, thoroughly impressed by the young tech mogul he'd helped raise. Even my younger sister Sarah was hanging on Michael's every word. And it all started with Julia's little idea, Michael added, throwing me what he probably thought was a generous acknowledgement. Remember that conversation at Christmas 2 years ago about personalized eye therapy? Who knew it would turn into something this big? My name is Julia Chen, and at 32, I was watching my stepbrother take credit for a company that was secretly mostly mine. Not that Michael or anyone else at this table knew that particular detail. It was just a rough concept, I said modestly, playing my part. You're the one who made it real. Michael raised his glass in my direction. Here's to family inspiration. Though maybe next time come up with an idea you can actually execute yourself, sis. The condescension in his voice made my mother wince, but I just smiled. If he only knew about the execution that had already taken place. 2 years ago, that Christmas conversation hadn't been the casual chat Michael remembered. I had spent months developing the AI therapy concept, creating detailed business plans, and even building a basic prototype. When I shared it with Michael, I'd been looking for genuine feedback from someone I thought I could trust. Instead, 3 weeks later, he registered the company himself. Therapy was born, with Michael Stewart as its founder and CEO. He even used the name I suggested. Did you really come up with the basic idea, Julia? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. That's so cool. Oh, it was nothing, I assured her, catching Michael's sharp look. Just a vague concept. Michael did all the real work. What Michael didn't know was that while he'd been busy playing tech visionary, I'd been methodically acquiring control of his company through a complex network of shell corporations and investment vehicles. My phone buzzed quietly, a message from Thomas, my lawyer. Final paperwork filed. You now officially own 75.4% of Therapy through the holding companies. Congratulations. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to appreciate the irony of the situation. Michael thought he was celebrating the biggest deal of his life, but he just unknowingly sold the majority of his company to me. The journey to this moment had started the day I discovered Michael's betrayal. I'd been working late at my consulting job when a colleague sent me a link. Check out this hot new startup, right up your alley. There it was, my entire concept, down to the specific features I'd outlined, being presented by Michael at a tech conference. He was using my slides, my research, even some of my code, all repackaged under his name. Most people would have confronted him immediately or sued for theft of intellectual property. But I knew better. Michael had carefully covered his tracks, and our family dynamics made direct confrontation complicated. Mom had married Michael's father when we were teenagers, and she'd spent years trying to blend our families seamlessly. So I chose a different path. While Michael focused on being the charismatic face of Therapy, I worked quietly behind the scenes. My consulting job gave me connections to private equity firms and venture capitalists. I created a series of investment companies, each seemingly independent but all leading back to me. Every time Therapy needed funding, my shell companies were there, offering attractive terms. Michael, ever confident in his own brilliance, never questioned why investors were so eager to buy in. He was too busy giving interviews and attending tech conferences to notice that each funding round diluted his ownership while strengthening mine. Everything okay in there? Mom called through the bathroom door, snapping me back to the present. Michael's about to tell us about the expansion plans. Coming? I called back, checking my reflection in the mirror. The same soft-spoken, supportive stepsister Michael had always underestimated looked back at me. I returned to the dining room just as Michael was explaining his vision for the company's future. The acquiring company wants to take Therapy global, he announced. They're keeping me on as Chief Innovation Officer, with a huge compensation package. That's wonderful, sweetheart, his father beamed. Always knew you had it in you. I caught Sarah giving me a strange look. My younger sister had always been more perceptive than the rest of the family. Did you work with AI in your consulting job, Julia? She asked innocently. Michael's smile flickered slightly. Different kind of AI, he said quickly. Julia's work was much more basic. If he only knew that my basic work had included developing most of the core technology his company now used. The patents were held by one of my shell companies, which had then licensed them to Therapy at suspiciously favorable rates. Actually, I said, deciding to push just a little. I'd love to hear more about the technical side of things, Michael. How did you solve the privacy compliance issues we discussed that Christmas? I watched him squirm slightly before launching into a vague explanation that basically outlined the exact solution I detailed in my original business plan, the one he'd stolen. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Thomas. Acquiring company wants to meet with all major shareholders next week. Time to decide how you want to handle this. That was the question, wasn't it? In a few days, Michael would discover that his great exit wasn't quite what he thought. The company he believed he'd sold wasn't really his to sell. More wine, Julia? Mom offered, noticing my distraction. No thanks, I smiled. I need to drive back to the city tonight. Early meeting tomorrow. Michael couldn't resist another dig. Must be tough still working those long consulting hours. You should have been more entrepreneurial like me, taking some risks. I thought about the millions I'd spent quietly buying control of his company, the careful legal maneuvering, the years of patient planning while he took credit for my work. We can't all be visionary founders, I said mildly. Some of us have to do the detail work. Dad raised his glass to Michael, our family's first millionaire. Everyone clinked glasses enthusiastically. I participated in the toast while checking my calendar. The shareholders' meeting was in exactly 6 days. That's when Michael would learn what detail work really meant. As dinner wrapped up, Michael pulled me aside. Listen, sis, he said, his voice softening with what he probably thought was generosity. I feel bad about how things worked out. How about I throw some consulting work your way once the acquisition is complete? Small token of appreciation for the original idea. I looked at my stepbrother, successful, arrogant, completely unaware of what was coming, and felt an almost overwhelming urge to tell him everything. Instead, I just smiled. That's very thoughtful, Michael, but let's see how the acquisition plays out first. He clapped me on the shoulder, already turning away. Your loss, but the offer stands. Family has to look out for each other, right? Right, I agreed softly. Family first. The conference room at Thomas's law firm felt too small for the tension it contained. I sat quietly at the end of the table, watching Michael chat confidently with the acquiring company's executives. He hadn't even questioned my presence when I walked in, probably assumed I was there to take notes or provide administrative support. Before we proceed with final signatures, Thomas began, we need to review the shareholder structure of Therapy. He started distributing folders to everyone present. As you'll see, the ownership breakdown is somewhat different from what was initially presented. Michael flipped open his folder casually, then froze. I watched the color drain from his face as he processed the information in front of him. This must be a mistake, he said, his voice tight. These numbers can't be right. The numbers are quite accurate, Thomas replied calmly. Through various investment vehicles, the majority shareholder of Therapy is actually Nova Holdings LC, which owns 75.4% of the company. I've never heard of Nova Holdings. Michael snapped, shuffling through the papers. I own this company. I founded it. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time, Nova Holdings is my company. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of confusion and dawning horror. What? He whispered. Perhaps we should take a brief recess, Thomas suggested smoothly. Give everyone a chance to review the documentation thoroughly. The acquiring company's executives nodded, looking somewhat bemused. They'd been briefed on the real ownership structure weeks ago. It was only Michael who was in the dark. As soon as the door closed behind them, Michael exploded. What the hell is this, Julia? Some kind of joke? No joke, I said calmly. Every funding round, every investment, every major stock purchase over the past 2 years, they all trace back to companies I control. You never bothered to look too closely at your investors, did you? But that's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. I smiled. My consulting work paid better than you thought, and it's amazing what you can do with good credit and better lawyers when you have a solid business plan. The original business plan, actually. The one you took from my laptop that Christmas. His face went from pale to red. You can't prove that. I don't need to. I replied, opening my own folder. The ownership structure is legal and documented. You've been running my company all this time, Michael. You just didn't know it. He slumped in his chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. Why? He asked finally. Why not just confront me when I started the company? Would you have listened? Would anyone? I leaned forward. You saw an opportunity and took it, never thinking I'd be capable of doing anything about it. That was your mistake. Does the family know? Not yet. Though I imagine dinner conversations will be interesting once they do. Thomas returned then, the other executives filing in behind him. Shall we continue? He asked professionally. The next hour was excruciating for Michael. Every page he had to sign reminded him that he wasn't the brilliant success story he thought he was. His 15% ownership stake was worth a few million, but nothing close to the fortune he'd been bragging about. One more thing, I said as the meeting wound down. About your position as Chief Innovation Officer with the acquiring company. Michael's head snapped up, fear in his eyes. You can keep it, I said quietly. You're good at being the face of things, at driving growth. Just remember who you're really working for now. The acquiring company's CEO nodded. We assumed you'd want him to stay on, given the family connection. Michael stared at me, trying to process this unexpected mercy. Why would you let me stay? Because unlike you, I understand the value of using people's actual talents, I replied. You're a good salesman, Michael, a good frontman. That's worth something, as long as you remember it's not worth everything. The meeting ended with Michael shell-shocked and silent. As everyone filed out, he caught my arm. The family, he said quietly. You'll humiliate me in front of them, in front of my father. I thought about all the dinners I'd sat through, listening to him brag about his stolen success. About Mom's proud smiles, Dad's approving nods, Sarah's hero worship. The truth will come out eventually, I said. But how and when? That depends on you. Over the next few weeks, the story of TherapAI's acquisition made headlines in the tech world. Michael was quoted in the press releases, still playing his role. But there was a new humility in his statements. Every interview had to be approved by the board, by me. The family found out gradually. Sarah figured it out first, reading between the lines of the press coverage and connecting it to things she'd observed over the years. She showed up at my apartment one night, full of questions. You let him take credit all this time, she said, shaking her head. Why? Sometimes winning isn't about getting credit, I told her. It's about having control. Mom and Dad took longer to understand what had happened. The truth came out during another family dinner, this one much quieter than the celebration a few weeks earlier. I don't understand, Mom said, looking between Michael and me. I stole her idea, Michael admitted finally, staring at his plate. I took her work and claimed it as my own. And she outsmarted me completely. The silence that followed was heavy with years of assumptions and misjudgments. Dad looked like he aged a decade in minutes, realizing how wrong he'd been about both his stepchildren. The company is doing well, I said finally, breaking the tension. Michael's staying on in a leadership role. Nothing has to change. Everything's already changed, Dad said quietly. He was right. The family dynamics shifted subtly but significantly after that. Michael's boasting stopped. Instead of dismissing my opinions, he began actively seeking them. Mom started asking about my other projects, finally seeing me clearly instead of through the lens of Michael's success. A year later, TherapAI had expanded globally, helping millions of people access mental health support through AI technology. Michael had grown into his role, actually earning respect instead of just assuming it. We developed a new kind of relationship, not quite friends, but no longer rivals. You could have destroyed me, he said during a rare moment of honesty after a board meeting. Why didn't you? I thought about it carefully before answering. Because this way, you have to live with knowing exactly who you are and who I am. That's worth more than revenge. The lesson hadn't been cheap. It had cost millions to quietly take control of TherapAI. But watching Michael learn humility, seeing him actually grow into the success he'd once only pretended to be, made it worth every penny. Sarah asked me once if I regretted not getting public credit for creating TherapAI. I showed her the company's financial reports instead. Credit is for people who need others to believe in them, I told her. Power is for people who believe in themselves. The family still has dinner together regularly, though the conversations are different now. Michael talks less but says more. Mom asks better questions. Dad watches us both with new understanding. And I sit quietly just as before, but now everyone knows that quiet doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes I catch Michael looking at me during these dinners, still trying to figure out exactly how I did it. He'll never know all the details, the late nights planning, the careful financial maneuvers, the patience it took to let him think he was winning until the perfect moment. But he knows enough to understand that success isn't about who talks the loudest or claims credit the fastest. Sometimes it's about the quiet one at the end of the table, the one everyone underestimated, quietly building an empire while they were busy bragging about building the kingdom.